politic called Peter Tatchell, who has been campaigning for human rights, democracy, LGBTQ+, freedom and global justice since 1967. He has been a firm supporter of the Baloch liberation cause for more than 1 decade. Through the Peter Tatchell Foundation, he currently campaigns for human rights in Britain and international. Please, let's welcome Peter Tatchell.
Thank you all very, very much. I want to start by giving my congratulations to the Baloch National Movement for organising this very important conference, to give a voice to the concerns of the Baloch people. I also want to express my appreciation for the awesome, brilliant contributions by previous speakers. They have set out very clearly the gross human rights abuses in occupied Balochistan by the Pakistan state and its military. I want to address the specific issue of how do we get from where Balochistan is today to where we want it to be in the future. In other words, how do we progress not just an end to the human rights abuses, but also self-determination for the Baloch people? This is a huge, huge challenge. We all know the problem. What we must address is the solution. Now, I speak as a friend and ally of the people of Balochistan, going back many, many years. But I am mindful that the future of Balochistan is a matter for the people of Balochistan and for the national movement of Balochistan. It's not up to me or any other outsiders to dictate solutions. But what I can do is offer my experience and knowledge based upon nearly 6 decades of campaigning and support of liberation movements. From Vietnam to East Timor to West Papua today, what I have are some ideas about how the people of Balochistan can move forward. All I'm doing is offering ideas for consideration. They are suggestions, not prescriptions. It is you, the people of Balochistan, who must decide. But what I am saying today is a result of lengthy discussions I've had over many years with Baloch activists. And the common theme that they all say is, we don't have a path to peace and self-determination. We know our aspiration is in that direction, but we don't have a practical path to enable it to happen. Now, there are many laudable different aims from different sectors of the Balochistan National Democratic Movement. And that comprises, of course, many different organizations, not just the Baloch National Movement, but many others as well. The problem is there isn't, in my perception, and the perception of many Baloch activists, any coherent, practical path for a plan of action that will lead to peace, to end the occupation, and to secure a negotiated political settlement. In my view, and the view of the activists I've spoken with, there is a common agreement that the Baloch movement needs to put Pakistan on the spot by proposing a credible plan of action. This is what we want. It's how we're going to get from here to there. The international community also wants to see a plan. If they're going to support your struggle, they need to know what your plan is, what you want, how you propose to get there. They want to know what you stand for. and what you propose to achieve a solution. Many of you will be familiar with the draft Balochistan Freedom Charter, the draft Balochistan Freedom Charter, which was first proposed here in Geneva in 2010 by a coalition of Baloch activists. It is a roadmap to de-escalate the conflict and lead to national liberation and the creation of a new independent state. It proposes a 6-stage process for peace and self-determination. And I want to outline them each briefly. Very importantly, it draws on the ideas, the principles, the policies that were used in the Vietnam peace process in the 1970s to end the US-Vietnam War. The first principle is a UN-supervised ceasefire, the cessation of military operations by all sides, which means the confinement of Pakistani military forces to barracks and Baloch national insurgents to guerrilla camps. That's got to be the starting point. A de-escalation, an end to the fighting, a negotiated agreement. The second principle is the release of all political prisoners and all disappeared persons. A full account of those who are no longer alive. And that is incumbent on the Pakistan state. The third principle is open access to all parts of Balochistan for media, aid agencies, and human rights organizations. That access, that transparency, that openness is absolutely essential so the world knows through independent cooperation what has been happening in Balochistan. And as you know, right now, Balochistan is effectively closed to journalists, international journalists, aid agencies, and human rights organizations. The fourth principle is the right of return of displaced persons. Refugees who fled Balochistan, they must have the right to return. They must have the restitution of their land and property. And there must be full compensation by Pakistan for losses caused by its forces during the conflict. The fifth principle is an end to inward colonization of Balochistan by non-Baloch settlers. What Pakistan is doing is deliberately encouraging inward colonization with the ultimate aim of outnumbering the indigenous Baloch people, so that the population becomes non-Baloch and therefore can be used by the Pakistani state to pursue its objectives. And the sixth and final principle is there's got to be a UN-supervised referendum on self-determination which offers the people of Balochistan the option of independence. Now those are 6 core principles which could be the negotiating template for a peace plan. Of course, Pakistan is going to resist. But if the people of Balochistan go with a peace plan similar to these 6 principles to international aid agencies, to the United Nations, to the European Union, to the United States, if they go to them with this plan, the world will know that you have a credible, practical, achievable solution. And that's what mobilized public support for the Vietnam peace plan in the 1970s. The Vietnamese had a plan, they put it to the world community saw it as achievable, and therefore the world community pushed the United States to agree a settlement. Now, the Balochistan Freedom Charter also proposes 6 principles as the basis for an independent state of Balochistan. And this is incredibly important because the international community is not going to support your struggle unless it knows what you stand for, unless it knows what you would do if you had power, if you had control. So the first principle is social justice, equality, and human rights for all Baloch people, based on the principles of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, including, very importantly, equal rights for women. As we've heard before, Balochistan is a deeply patriarchal tribal society where women have not had an equal place historically. But this is your chance to turn that page and make it clear that when Balochistan is free and independent, women will have equal status in that society, which will strengthen international support for your movement. The second principle is one of land reform, the right of every adult Baloch person to have a share in land ownership. As you know, right now, there are huge disparities of wealth and income in Balochistan. There is a very, very disparate relationship between land and certainly very wealthy families and the wider ordinary Baloch population. That has to change. There's got to be equal access to land ownership by all the people of Balochistan. And allied to that, the third principle, which is a redistribution of wealth and power to all the people. So a democratic parliament based on universal suffrage for every Baloch person, every adult Baloch person, and a fair share of Balochistan's resources. So if you get back control of your resources, it can't be taken by a handful of wealthy Baloch entrepreneurs or wealthy families. It has to be fairly shared among all the people of Balochistan. The fourth principle is a secular state. A state where people of all faiths and no faith have equal legal status, and where no religion is privileged in law, government, or public institutions. So in complete contrast with Pakistan, where Islam is the state religion and governs so many aspects of Pakistan life. The fifth principle is democratic and personal freedoms, including a commitment to free multi-party elections, the right to protest, freedom of speech and the press, as enshrined in international human rights law. To be sure that you stand for these fundamental principles agreed by the peoples of the world, that's a very powerful impetus for the global community to support your cause, knowing that's what you stand for. And sixth principle is a UN Commission of Inquiry into disappeared persons and the victims of detention without trial, torture, and extrajudicial killings, leading to a UN special tribunal, modeled on the special tribunal in the former Yugoslavia, to prosecute human rights abusers and war criminals for their crimes in Balochistan. Now, these suggested, and they are only suggestions, these suggested 6 principles of an independent state are similar to, and to some degree modelled on, the Freedom Charter of the African National Congress of South Africa, which successfully mobilised the people of South Africa and the wider global community against apartheid and in support of the African National Congress. Because they had a Freedom Charter which set out what they were standing for, what they aspired to achieve, the world was confident to know that the ANC could be supported. If I can just reiterate, this draft Balochistan Freedom Charter is important for 4 reasons, some of which I've already elaborated. Number one, the people of Balochistan, first and foremost, have a right to know what the National Liberation Movement stands for. They are much more likely to rally around and unite behind a clear, practical, concrete liberation program. 2, the Balochistan Freedom Charter could become the focus for uniting the many diverse Baloch factions. It's worded with broad appeal to unite the largest possible number of Baloch people, despite whatever other disagreements they may have. The problem with the Baloch movement today is it is divided. It's factional. And you never win when you're not united. You have to be united in order to make progress. If you can't unite yourselves, then the world community is sadly not going to take you seriously. And that means sinking differences. Now, of course, I understand the historic differences between different movements in Balochistan. But I think all of them should be able to agree the principles of the draft Balochistan Freedom Charter, or a modified version of it. They're the common ground on which you all suffer and from which you all need respite and liberation. If you look at every successful struggle in history, maximizing unity has been the key. Division undermines and weakens the struggle. So take the example of South Africa. The United Democratic Front, in the apartheid era, united all the disparate anti-apartheid groups. The African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, AZAPO, the students, the trade unions, the churches, they all came together to build a mighty, unstoppable movement under the rubric of the United Democratic Front. The same going back decades to Vietnam. The liberation struggle there brought together the students, the unions, the multi-faith communities, all united in one common struggle to free Vietnam from US occupation. So that's why I say it's so important that you work for unity. Number 3, Pakistan needs to be put on the spot with specific demands to end militarization, occupation, and the violation of human rights. It can easily bat away your concerns if you don't have practical, concrete, achievable demands. Agreeing to the right to self-determination, which you do. That's fundamental. It's in accordance with the United Nations Charter and with international law. But all these other practical elements are also part of the mix to convince the world that you have a serious, credible alternative. Number 4, as I mentioned earlier, the United Nations and governments around the world are much more likely to support the Baloch national struggle if they know what you're seeking, if they know the character of a future independent Balochistan. The Balochistan Freedom Charter is only a draft, but it's clear with its commitment to democracy, human rights, secularism, and social justice. It is so important because these principles resonate with democratic governments whose support you need, with human rights organizations whose support you need, and of course, institutions like the United Nations, the European Union, and many others. I just want to emphasize that whether these proposals are the right ones is a matter for debate. You must decide. All I'm saying is this was agreed here in Geneva 14 years ago by a group of Baloch activists. They put their heads together, they came from different organizations, different movements, they disagreed about lots of things, but they all agreed about these core principles. And that, I think, is so important. It's so important to have a specific, credible roadmap. A roadmap which the people of Balochistan, together with the United Nations and the international community, can press Pakistan to accept. You want your representatives to go to the EU, to the United Nations, to the US government, and so on, with concrete plans and proposals. Now, some critics say that Balochistan can never win against its all-powerful, overbearing occupier, Pakistan. But from my knowledge of history, David can defeat Goliath, as the US learned to its cost in Vietnam. The greatest, mightiest military superpower in history was brought to its knees and forced to negotiate a political settlement by a tiny little Asian country with a peasant army with a huge passion, but also with practical proposals to end the war. So, like all people everywhere, the people of Balochistan have a right to self-determination. It's enshrined in the UN Charter. Use it. Vocalize it. Pakistan can delay Balochistan's right to self-determination. It can put off independence, but at great financial, moral, political, and reputational cost. One thing is certain: the freedom of Balochistan cannot, must not, and will not be denied. Thank you.